While we wait for President Donald Trump to address the crowd at the Capital One Arena there in Washington, D.C., we're going to try to discuss some of the political news on this side of the border. It was a busy weekend. Have a listen.
I am running to be leader of the Liberal Party and the next Prime Minister of Canada.
It is time for a new generation of leadership. My name is Karina Gould, and I'm running to be the next leader of the Liberal Party of Canada.
That's right, that leadership race as two more hopefuls join the race to replace Justin Trudeau. Former Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland and Government House Leader Karina Gould launched their campaigns over the weekend. Taking questions for the first time since she quit cabinet last month, Freeland clarified what drove the timing of her decision.
For some time, I had been in disagreement with the Prime Minister, specifically over spending. Those disagreements got worse after President Trump threatened to impose 25% tariffs on our country.
Karina Gould, meanwhile, says the challenge of winning the next election comes down to a question of trust.
Canadians have lost trust in our party. And if we are going to be able to keep building our country, we must rebuild our party.
Okay, so will either of these messages resonate with Liberals and broader voters? We're going to discuss that with the power panel as we wait for the President to start speaking. Vandana, I want to get you on this. Chrystia Freeland, she had a lot of disruption at her launch yesterday, but she attached herself to all of the successes of the Trudeau government and then said she had to stand up to him for the good of the country when it came to the fall economic statement. Are people going to buy that you're only there for the good things, but you're not responsible for any of the bad things when you were the finance minister?
So I think voters across, perhaps. I think Liberals themselves, not so much. And I think the reason I say that is that, we have seen through other times in our party what happens when you challenge and have infighting. And I think some people will not feel the same way about how she's saying these things, or even just airing family dirty laundry, right? And using that as approach. I think actually what Minister Gould did, or I think she's stepping down now, but Karina did, and talking about renewal and talking about something that I think Liberals will feel a lot strongly about is people have lost trust in our party. We need to rebuild, and a positive message, and talking about that. I think that is more likely to gather Liberals around. I know a lot of people counter out, but I wouldn't be surprised if she was a lot of people's choices or second choice. And I think her message resonates. She talked a lot about grassroots renewal. She talked about young Liberals. She talked about when the membership themselves have put forward ideas at policy conventions and where that went. Right. So a lot of grassroots understanding. And Minister Freeland, I think the problem is also not only was she disrupted several times, on media feeds it was cut off. YouTube, she only had like 98 viewers at the time, so hard to get that message out. But I think it is hard to, and you can say some of that disruption is part of her connection to the government. No matter how you feel about that, people are disappointed in governments around the world in the response. And how do you separate the two? And I think that's something that she's going to have a hard time separating out.
Just quickly, 20 minutes before her launch, Melanie Joly issued a statement endorsing Mark Carney. That's interesting timing. She's an organizer in Quebec. There's a lot of the Suk Dalawal, Randeep Sarai, George Sahal, organizers.
Very strong organizers.
Right. So there's volume endorsements and then there's value endorsements. Yes. People who can swing more than their own ridings. What do you make of Joly's move as an example of that?
Good timing. I mean, Minister Freeland was doling out a lot of strong Liberal Quebec members. Bibeau, Lébussier, these are really strong people, especially in the region. So again, weighted. Right. Everyone's even saying getting to the regions is kind of more important than even just getting all through Montreal. But that's important. And actually, I saw someone who I wouldn't say is a card-carrying Liberal, but has been on this program before, but not under COVID. Right. But posted on her Instagram today, Melanie Joly backing Mark Carney says volumes. And that's not someone who's in the party. I've never seen it at a biennial or anything like that. But that was very interesting for me. And that's someone who's just like an observer. I think so. She does have a strong organization. She is well liked and known. And I think she is thinking of what her future will be like. I don't think this will be the end of Melanie Joly in terms of running for a leadership campaign. But I think that was very interesting at that time, especially when so many other Quebec voices were already out for Minister Freeland. I will say for Mr. Carney, going back to what you said about values. News. A lot of strong organizers, all in Edmonton. I also noticed he went to Surrey. I think he went to Richmond, Abbotsford, started out west. So again, you are more likely to get value from places like that. Getting even like the 10 Liberals in, random like Saskatoon riding where you don't have many. That's going to be a better weight for you than saturating yourself in Brampton, for example, which is also important. But so I thought that was very interesting in terms of his decision making.
Yes, and that lower mainland turf vacated by Chrystia Clark, so wide open in a big way. Rob, Vandana says the endorsement by Melanie Joly, she referred someone saying it speaks volumes. You speak volumes. What do you make of where we are after this weekend's events on the leadership?
Well, if you want to know what we saw in effect was the inelegant spectacle of people sprinting backwards away from an unpopular prime minister's legacy. That's what it looks like. And that tells you that what some of the challenges are for those who are coming from within the cabinet of former cabinet ministers. It's going to be tough to say that you're the candidate of renewal if there's no end of video out there showing you joined at the hip to the prime minister, nodding very vigorously in approval to every single thing he's been saying for the last decade. So that's their challenge. In terms of Melanie Joly, her reason for doing it, I think, was interesting because this is, I think, the second important element for a lot of Liberals as they go to cast ballots and for a lot of Canadians, because Canadians are watching this. The time frame is so compressed that Canadians who are going to be voting in an election that could come as soon as May are watching. And that element is who is best poised among Liberal leaders or Liberal leader aspirants to face the Trump moment, face the Trump challenge. And that seemed to be the other important element that all of the candidates tried to get at last week. Chrystia Freeland tried to say, I'm the guy who's wrestled him to the ground already, and I've earned his opprobrium from the presidential podium. And for a lot of Liberals, that's a shiny badge. Mark Carney's pitch is, you want somebody who's been through economic crises? Two conservative prime ministers have appointed me to run their central banks to get them through these crises. So it'll be interesting to see which ones Liberals think makes the best argument, if that's an important element, and it seems like that's a very important element in this race as well.
Lisa, struck by how hard Chrystia Freeland came in all in on Donald Trump, right? It was all about what she did last time. There's a piece in the Washington Post and stuff today. There's no tariffs today. What if Trump is not as bad as everyone was expecting between now and the 9th of March? I mean, what does that do to her central value proposition to voters here?
I think she made a good move where she is planning herself, because the reality is none of these leadership candidates can run on policy because they're all very, very firmly tied to the last 10 years of a Justin Trudeau prime minister. And that's not a popular policy play. So going to the membership and pitching them on the policy that this is the way in which they're going to approach, it's not going to work. So you got to figure out where your differentiator is. So Karina Gould comes out and she says, I'm going to do the grassroots stuff like Vandana talked about. And Mark Carney comes out and says, I'm an outsider and I've done well in other areas. And Chrystia Freeland, she's got the Donald Trump moment. She's got Donald Trump saying how much he doesn't like that nasty woman. She has those things and she has to run on them. But the reality is that the one thing that I notice about the Liberal Party in choosing their leaders, they don't tend to go for the leader that they think has the best policy. They tend to go for the leader who they think is going to bring them to the promised land of winning the next government. I mean, frankly, sometimes conservatives should learn for those kinds of lessons, but we don't, and they do. And as a result, they're going to try to figure out what it is that Canadians are going to tap into and believe. Chrystia Freeland thinks that her ability to tangle with Donald Trump is something Canadians writ large are going to think about over the next 7 weeks when they're electing a leader, and whether or not Liberals are going to believe that that is their best wedge against Pierre Poilievre, it's going to be for them to see. But those are the ways in which they're going to run, and we'll end up at, I guess, March 9.
Brad, what do you make of her attempts, Chrystia Freeland's, to disentangle herself from the prime minister the way she did? Talking about how she stood up to Trump, she stood up to Putin, and when she had to, for the good of the country, she stood up to Justin Trudeau, which is an interesting line to hear.
I think there's...
Oh, no, Brad. Sorry, Rob. Sorry, Brad. Did I say Rob? I meant Brad. My apologies. You can go after him, though. Go ahead.
Two major challenges for Chrystia Freeland. One is her ability to communicate. One of the criticisms during her time in cabinet was her ability to communicate and connect with Canadians. That's the first one. Second challenge is to separate herself from the Trudeau legacy. The Trump work that she did in the first administration back in 2017, 2018 offers her something. She doesn't want to run against Pierre Poilievre right now. The House is not sitting. There's no comparisons. But what she does have is her, I think, broadly accepted good job during the NAFTA 1.0 negotiations or 2.0 negotiations in the first administration. So she wants to run on that. Now, what's interesting is that she says, it's important for leaders to listen to people. And when it comes to the consumer carbon tax, we listen to people say it's no longer there. So she's abandoning that. But at the same time, she's saying, but I am listening to people. They like $10 a day childcare. That's something that I was partly responsible for. I like that. Separating that which is unpopular from Trudeau, which is going to be a tough thing to walk. But she's in the primary. The number one thing for both her and Mark Carney is going to be the next public domain poll that shows which Liberal leadership contender has the least gap between them and Poilievre. That'll be for the points that have been raised, I think by Lisa, saying that Liberals will not look for policy because they're both against the carbon tax. Carbon tax is dead. It'll be gone before the summer in this country. It's who's got the best likelihood to win, and that'll only be shown not by organizing in and of itself, but by the public domain polls.
Right.
So give it a handful of days, and we'll see who's got the smallest gap between themselves and Poilievre.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if the public domain polling can actually show change while Justin Trudeau is still Prime Minister. Do you know what I mean? He signaled he's leaving, but he's not gone. And until he goes, does that shake loose public opinion? I'm not sure how that works, so we'll leave that to greater minds than mine. Rob, go ahead. You were keen to jump in, so let's go.
Oh, no, I first of all, Brad made all those points that I was going to make.
I stole all your stuff, Rob. Sorry, man.
That's quite all right. I'll tell you a couple of things other things that I'm struck by. First of all, we have three leading candidates, all of whom got masters from Oxford. So there's not a shortage of brains in this leadership race. I thought that was interesting. We're at a moment, though, when a lot of Canadians and a lot of people in democracies are not interested in brains. They believe brains got us into a lot of trouble over the last 30 or 40 years. The other thing that I think is fascinating about this race, I mean, I'm interested in politics for what it does for human beings and for the human beings that pull the levers, who do these things for human beings. And that's the human relationship between Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland. Mr. Carney stood as godfather to Ms. Freeland's son. They know each other very well. They spoke to each other on a regular basis. They're friends. Can this friendship withstand the hothouse fire test of what we're going to see in a shortened leadership race? It'll be interesting and fascinating to watch that as well.
Yeah, Vandana, I wonder about that, and I wonder about just how the caucus feels about the sharp separation that Chrystia Freeland is trying to carve out there from the past agenda, like after the resignation. There were some interesting things I noticed, like she suggested in her first interview with the TVA that, you know, her departure her resignation saved Canadians $6 billion because the $250 checks weren't in the fall economic statement. But those were removed prior to her resignation. She got those removed in a one-on-one conversation with the Prime Minister, and he agreed to not have it go into the fiscal framework. So there's some inconsistencies there that people inside caucus and staffers are going to say, wait a minute. I mean, does that ripple out into the larger Liberal community, or is that just too inside baseball?
I think if in this moment, and I hear the things on the polling and all that, the most important thing is Liberal memberships. So that's inside the family. That is caucus, that is caucus organizations. That's going to be the most important thing for all three, well, 5 candidates, okay? So I think, we can't forget them, but I would say, so yeah, people will have been in part of discussions, internal discussions, they've seen things in caucus, and they might be like, well, I think you have revisionist history here, or they'd be like, I don't like how you're torpedoing the Liberal Party while you do this. That's not what I want you to do, because that doesn't help us get elected, right? So I think that will, and some people, there are caucus members who are standing by her, There are caucus members who are going to be against that. So that's going to be a gamble for her. She wants to keep touting that. I also don't know if that's a huge winning election issue to gain in more memberships, right? To respond to one thing, though, I will say, I think Conservatives picked Poilievre over Mr. Charest not for policy, but because he's a good campaigner and looks like he can. I think that's where it is.
Yeah, well, yes, they may have learned a lesson. Who knows, right? But he is not going to be outworked. I think that is safe to say in terms of his campaign. Lisa, last word to you, and just what you think. Leaderships are always stressful on parties, right? As people take sides and draw their contrast lines. I mean, where do you think things stand right now in this one?
I think Chrystia Freeland was very clear about her relationship with Prime Minister Trudeau when they asked about what would be the one thing that you wouldn't do, that you'd like to distance yourself from. And she said that I'd never fire my finance minister the day after that she presented the fall economic update. I thought that was really telling. And to me, that meant that there are two ways in which a cabinet minister who is not happy with the way they were treated can actually talk about what happened to them. One is by writing a book, and that comes out many months later.
Yep.
And the other, it would appear, is by running for leader, where you're going to hear what she has to say about how she was treated and what happened and why she thinks she's the better leader going forward. The last thing, if I could add one last thing.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Trudeau is only going to be prime minister for 7 more weeks. Every minute that we progress towards that new leader is another minute of his influence being lessened and lost. And I think we have to realize that when we're dealing with the United States and we're dealing with other big matters, people outside of our borders really don't view him as a going concern anymore at all. We might as well just consider ourselves as a floating state at the moment.
Okay, well, we'll see what they can get done in the time they have left, because no Trump tariffs today, but that is still there, and this is still the government until it's not. We'll talk about this more with the Power Panel next time. I want to thank you all for being here. Vandana Cotter, Brad Levine, Lisa Raitt, and Rob Russo.